Good morning. Welcome to our video for Sabbath, October the 24th, 2020. We're going to spend some time today examining the practice of abortion, its history, its causes and effects, and how it's viewed across society and within the Christian faith. I hope you'll bear with me because most in fact, of what will follow will be historical in nature, and we won't get down to brass tacks until the end of the presentation. Abortion is defined in the Webster Dictionary as an untimely birth, a miscarriage, that which falls short of maturity by arrest of development. That's a pretty simple definition for a very complicated and divisive subject. By that definition, abortion sounds almost a natural occurrence, which sometimes it is. But abortions can be induced, as we know, and they have been since very early on in human history. An abortion can be self-induced by a female who is pregnant, or an abortion can be induced by someone to whom a pregnant female goes for help in ending her pregnancy. Over the centuries, abortion has been practiced in many or most cultures throughout the earth, and methods of inducing an abortion have included a range of methods, such as extreme physical exertion by work or exercise, intentional trauma by falling, forcible compression of the abdomen by striking, or aggressive massage, mechanical constriction with belt, girdle, ingestion of antagonistic substances or concoctions, and by surgical invasion. In our Bible's Old Testament book of Exodus, part of the Pentateuch, written more than 1,000 years before the birth of Jesus, we find binding legal instructions being handed down through Moses concerning a variety of things, including personal injuries. And Exodus chapter 21, verse 22 reads this way: "If men who are fighting," it says, "hit a pregnant woman, and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise." That's about as close as the Bible ever comes to an outright statement concerning abortion. Although the passage doesn't explicitly state it, the presumption is that injury to either the mother or the child or the fetus are in play here, and the penalty to the person causing the injury or death was to be equal to the injury that was caused. Today, in the United States, we have a law called the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, commonly known as Lacey and Connors Law, passed by Congress and signed into law by President Bush on April the 1st, 2004. That law somewhat reflects this premise found in the Bible there in Exodus by allowing two charges to be brought against someone who kills a pregnant woman, a pregnant mother, one for the mother and one for the unborn fetus. An ancient Greek, or the ancient Greek thinker Aristotle, who lived in the 4th century before Christ, wrote this: "The line between lawful and unlawful abortion will be marked by the fact of having sensation and being alive. Before that point was reached, Aristotle did not regard abortion as the killing of something human. Aristotle considered the embryo to gain a human soul at 40 days. if male, and at 90 days if female. Before that, he concluded, it had vegetable and animal souls. Now, I'm not sure how Aristotle came to that reasoning, but as we know, an awful lot has been learned since that time. Hippocrates, in his famous oath, forbade the insertion of instruments to induce abortion, a prohibition which has been interpreted by some medical scholars as prohibiting abortion altogether. Scribonius Largus, a Roman physician, wrote, quote, Hippocrates, who founded our profession, laid the foundation for our discipline by an oath in which it was prescribed not to give a pregnant woman a kind of medicine that expels the embryo or fetus. Some medical scholars, however, believe that Hippocrates only sought to discourage physicians from trying dangerous, intrusive methods to abort a fetus. The Hippocratic Oath originally prohibited all surgery, which at that time, of course, was far more dangerous than in later centuries. In fact, at that time, surgeons were a separate profession altogether from physicians. Soranus of Ephesus, a Greek physician who practiced in Alexandria and later on in Rome, acknowledged two parties among physicians of the day. Those who would not perform abortions, citing the Hippocratic Oath, and the other party, his own, which did perform abortions. Soranus recommended abortion in cases involving health complications as well as emotional immaturity, and provided detailed suggestions concerning abortion in his work entitled Gynecology. Punishment for abortion in the Roman Republic was generally linked to a violation of the father's right to dispose of his offspring. Because of the influence of Stoicism, which did not view the fetus as a person, the Romans did not punish abortion as homicide. Although abortion was commonly accepted in Rome, around 211 AD, the emperors Septimius Severus and Caracalla banned abortion as infringing on parental rights. The punishment was temporary exile. Then came the gradual spreading influence of Christianity. The early Christian work, called the Didache, written sometime in the 1st century, and considered for a while for inclusion into the New Testament canon, exhorted its readers, do not murder a child by abortion or kill a newborn infant. Tertullian, a Christian theologian, one of the considered the early church fathers, who lived in the 2nd and into the 3rd century, argued that abortion should be performed only in cases in which abnormal positioning of the fetus in the womb would endanger the life of the pregnant woman. Augustine, in his work Enchiridion, makes mention of surgical procedures being performed to remove fetuses which had died in utero. St. Augustine believed that abortion of a fetus animatus, a fetus with human limbs and shape, was murder. However, his beliefs on earlier stage abortion were similar to Aristotle's. Still, he could neither deny or affirm whether such partially formed fetuses would be resurrected as full people at the time of the second coming. Augustine wrote, "Now who is there that is not rather disposed to think that unformed abortions perish like seeds that have never fructified? And therefore the following question may be very carefully inquired into, and discussed by learned men, though I do not know whether it is in man's power to resolve it. At what time the infant begins to live in the womb, whether life exists in a latent form before it manifests itself in the motions of the living being. To deny that the young who are cut out limb by limb from the womb, lest if they were left there dead, the mother should die too, have never been alive, seems too audacious. Most Christians today strongly believe that aborting a pregnancy, once a heartbeat is detected in a fetus, is in essence the murder of an unborn child. And the laws of our nation and its states have often reflected that sentiment, but not always. From the time of colonization of the country until about the year 1880, abortion was permitted and widely practiced here. Abortion services eventually came to be marketed openly, and drugs to induce abortions were advertised in newspapers, could be bought from pharmacists or doctors, or ordered through the mail. In New York, surgical abortions in the 1800s had a death rate of 30%, causing the American Medical Association to launch an abortion campaign, an anti-abortion campaign, that resulted in abortion becoming the exclusive domain of physicians. A paper published in 1870 on the abortion services in Syracuse, New York, concluded that the method most often practiced there was to flush inside the uterus with injected water. The article's author, Eli Vandy Warkel, claimed this procedure was affordable even to a maid at the cost of $10 on an installment plan. Other prices which 19th century abortion providers are reported to have charged were much more steep. In Britain, it could cost from 10 to 50 guineas, or 5% of the yearly income of a lower middle class household. 19th century medicine saw tremendous advances in the areas of surgery, anesthesia, and sanitation. And social attitudes toward abortion also shifted. There were a number of factors contributing to this shift in opinion about abortion. In the United States, where physicians were the leading advocates of abortion criminalization laws, some of them argued that advances in medical knowledge showed that quickening, that is, the sign of life in the womb, was neither more nor less crucial in the process of gestation than any other step, and thus, if one opposed abortion after quickening occurred, one should oppose it before quickening as well. Practical reasons also influenced the medical field to lobby for anti-abortion laws. For one thing, abortion providers tended to be untrained and not members of medical societies. In an age where the leading doctors in the nation were attempting to standardize the medical profession, these irregular people, that is, outside practitioners, were considered a nuisance and danger to public health. The irregulars were also disliked because they were competition, and often cheap competition. But although the physicians' campaign against abortion began in the early 1800s, little real progress was made against abortion until after the Civil War. And in spite of the campaigns to end abortion, abortion advertising remained highly effective. Contemporary estimates of mid-19th century abortion rates suggest that between 20% and 25% of all pregnancies in the United States during that era ended in abortion. This era saw a marked shift in who was obtaining abortions. Before the start of the 19th century, most abortions were sought by unmarried women who had become pregnant out of wedlock. But out of 54 abortion cases that were published in the American medical journals between 1839 and 1880, over half were sought by married women. And well over 60% of those married women seeking an abortion already had at least one child. This rising trend of married women obtaining abortions caused great concern among conservative physicians. Much of the blame was placed on the growing women's rights movement, though ironically, many feminists of the era were also opposed to abortion. To many feminists, abortion was regarded as an undesirable necessity forced on women by thoughtless men. Even the free love wing of the feminist movement refused to advocate for abortion and treated the practice as an example of the hideous extremes to which modern marriage was driving women. Marital rape and the seduction of unmarried women were societal ills which feminists believed caused the need to abort, as men did not respect a woman's right to abstinence. Physicians remained the loudest voice in the anti-abortion debate, and they carried their agenda to the state legislatures around the country, advocating not only anti-abortion laws, but also laws against birth control and laws against the availability of contraceptives. Criminalization of abortion accelerated from the late 1860s through the efforts of concerned legislators, doctors, and the American Medical Association. In 1873, Anthony Comstock created the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice, an institution directed or dedicated to shaping and supervising public morality. That same year, Comstock successfully influenced the U.S. Congress to pass the Comstock Law, which made it illegal to deliver through the U.S. mail any, quote, obscene, lewd, or lascivious material. It also prohibited producing or publishing information pertaining to the procurement of abortion or the prevention of conception, the prevention of conception or venereal disease, even to medical students. The production, publication, importation, and distribution of such materials was suppressed under the Comstock Law as being obscene, and similar prohibitions were passed by 24 of the 37 states that were in existence at the time. By 1900, abortion was a felony in every state, though some states made allowances for abortion in limited circumstances, generally to protect the woman's life or to terminate pregnancies arising from rape or incest. Nevertheless, abortions not only continued to occur, but became increasingly available. In 1921, Margaret Sanger founded the American Birth Control League, which would become the Planned Parenthood Federation of America later on in 1942. By the 1930s, licensed physicians performed an estimated 800,000 abortions a year. By the 1960s in the United States, abortion remained illegal under any circumstances in 30 of the states, and legal, but only under certain circumstances, in 20 states. As before, such circumstances included pregnancy resulting from rape or incest, and pregnancy which would endanger the survival of the mother. In order to obtain abortions during that period, women would often travel from a state where abortion was illegal to one where it was legal. In 1965, the Supreme Court struck down one of the remaining Comstock laws against contraception, although the ruling only applied to contraception within marital relationships. In 1970, Hawaii became the first state to legalize abortion on the request of the woman. And in that year also, New York repealed its 1830 law and began allowing abortions up to the 24th week of pregnancy. A similar law was soon passed in Alaska. Also in 1970, Washington, the state of Washington, held a referendum on legalizing early pregnancy abortions, becoming the first state to legalize abortion through a direct vote of its citizens. Then, in 1973, the Supreme Court of the United States decision in Roe versus Wade and also Doe versus Bolton decriminalized abortion nationwide and imposed a uniform framework for state legislation on the issue. 19 years later, in 1992, in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the Supreme Court held that a law cannot place legal restrictions imposing an undue burden for, quote, the purpose or effect of placing a substantial obstacle in the path of a woman seeking an abortion of a non-viable fetus. There were other cases before Roe versus Wade and since, but Roe versus Wade is considered the pivotal case on abortion since it legalized abortion on a national basis with some limitations. Roe established that a woman has a right of privacy to obtain an abortion until viability, a point to be determined by the abortion doctor, but that this right, quote, must be considered against important state interests in regulation, unquote. Roe established a trimester or 12-week threshold of state interest in the life of the fetus over the course of the pregnancy, corresponding to the fetus's increasing viability, that is, its likelihood of survival outside the uterus of the woman. So, states were prohibited from banning abortion early in pregnancy, but allowed to impose increasing restrictions or sometimes outright bans later in a pregnancy. A central issue in the Roe case and in the wider abortion debate in general is whether human life or personhood begins at the moment of conception or at birth or at some point in between. The court declined to make an attempt at resolving this issue, noting, quote, we need not resolve the difficult question of when life begins, when those trained in the respective disciplines of medicine, philosophy, and theology are unable to arrive at any consensus. The judiciary, at this point in the development of man's knowledge, is not in a position to speculate as to the answer. Instead, the court chose to point out that historically, under English and American common law and statutes, quote, the unborn have never been recognized as persons in the whole sense, and thus the fetuses are not legally entitled to the protection afforded by the right to life specifically enumerated in the 14th Amendment. So, rather than asserting that human life begins at any specific point, the court simply declared that the state, beginning at the point of viability, has a compelling interest in protecting potential life. The current judicial interpretation of the U.S. Constitution regarding abortion, then, is that abortion is legal but may be restricted by the states to varying degrees. Subsequently, therefore, states have passed laws to restrict late-term abortions, to require parental notification in the case of a minor seeking an abortion, and mandate the disclosure of abortion risk information to patients prior to the procedure. One challenge of the legal abortion ruling now in place has been determining when the fetus is viable outside the womb as a measure of when the life of the fetus is its own and therefore subject to being protected by the state. In the majority opinion delivered by the court, viability was defined as, quote, potentially able to live outside the mother's womb, albeit with artificial aid. Viability is usually placed at about 7 months, 28 weeks, but may occur earlier, even at 24 weeks, said the court. Continuing medical advances over the past 3 decades since the court's 1973 ruling have made it possible for the survival of some babies born at 22 weeks or even earlier. Also, since 1973, the number of women dying due to abortion or complications pertaining to abortion has decreased dramatically, from 47 such deaths in 1973 to an average of 2 deaths in more recent years. Legal access to abortion continues to vary state by state, sometimes dramatically, with 87% of U.S. counties having no abortion provider. Moreover, due to the Hyde Amendment, originally passed by Congress in 1976, with revisions in 1981 and again in 1993, many state health programs do not cover abortion except where the life of the mother would be endangered if the fetus were carried to term. Why would a woman consider aborting a pregnancy? There are many reasons. Perhaps the pregnancy occurred as the result of rape or incest, as we've mentioned, and the woman can't bear the thought of giving birth to a child fathered by her attacker. Laws have made exception in that case, which is really quite rare. Perhaps the pregnancy was unintended, resulting from marital or extramarital sex or unmarried sex. Unintended pregnancies are quite common. In 2008, a national survey of family growth showed that rates of unintended pregnancy are high across our society as a whole, with the highest percentage occurring in segments of society of lower privilege and income, or as we like to say, socioeconomic status. That 2008 survey of family growth indicated that as many as 70% of all pregnancies among black women were unintended. 57% of all pregnancies among Hispanic women were unintended, and 42% of all pregnancies among white women were unintended. In 2000 to 2001, abortion rates among black women were 49 per 1,000. For Hispanic women, 33 per 1,000. And for white women, 13 per 1,000. Those figures include all women of reproductive age, including those who are not pregnant. In other words, the figures reflect the rate at which all U.S. women of reproductive age have an abortion each year. Here are some of the reasons women have given for choosing to have an abortion, from the most frequently given to the least frequently given. Number one, Having a baby would dramatically change my life, 74%. Number 2, I cannot afford a baby now, 73%. Number 3, I do not want to be a single mother, or I am having relationship problems, 48%. Number 4, I have completed my childbearing and just don't want to have any more children, 38%. Number 5, I am not ready for another child, 32%. Number 6, I do not want people to know I had sex or got pregnant, 25%. Number 7, I do not feel mature enough to raise a child, 22%. Number 8, my husband or partner wants me to have an abortion, 14%. Number 9, there are possible problems or complications affecting the health of the fetus, 13%. Number 10, there are possible problems or complications affecting my own health, 12%. Number 11, my parents want me to have this abortion, 6%. Number 12, I was a victim of rape, 1%. And number 13, I became pregnant as the result of incest, less than 0.5%. According to the Guttmacher Institute, more than 7 of 10 U.S. women obtaining an abortion report some religious affiliation. 37% Protestant, 28% Catholic, and 7% other. And 25% of those women say that they attend religious services at least once a month. The annual number of legally induced abortions in the United States doubled between 1973, when it was legalized, and 1979, and peaked in 1990. There was a slow but steady decline through the 1990s. Overall, the number of annual abortions decreased by 6% between 2000 and 2009, with temporary spikes in a couple of those years. By 2011, the abortion rate in the nation dropped to its lowest point since the Supreme Court legalized the procedure. According to a study performed by the Guttmacher Institute, long-acting contraceptive methods have had a significant impact in reducing unwanted pregnancies. But although the abortion rate in the United States has gradually declined in recent decades, still more than 862,000 abortions were performed in the United States in 2017. The 2017 abortion rate of 13.5 abortions per 1,000 women aged 15 to 44 was the lowest rate yet observed in the United States since reporting began. The abortion debate most commonly relates to the induced abortion of an embryo or fetus at some point during the pregnancy, which is also how the term is used in a legal sense. Some also use the term elective abortion or voluntary abortion, which describes the interruption of pregnancy before viability at the request of the woman, but not for medical reasons. Though there is a tendency in the abortion debate to frame an individual as either pro-choice or pro-life, shades of opinion do exist, with most Americans tending to agree with some positions held by both sides of the issue. A 2018 Gallup survey found the percentages of Americans who self-identified as pro-choice or pro-life were about equal at 48% each, but that more people considered abortion morally wrong, 48%, than morally acceptable, 43%. The survey found that 29% of the respondents believed abortion should be legal in all circumstances. 50% believed that abortion should be legal only under certain circumstances, and 20% believed abortion should be illegal in all circumstances. Today, abortion remains legal throughout the United States and its territories, although restrictions and accessibility vary from state to state. Although the Hyde Amendment generally bars federal funds from being used to provide Medicaid coverage for abortion, states still may use their own non-federal funds, and 15 states have a policy requiring the state to provide abortion coverage under Medicaid. Needless to say, abortion is a divisive issue throughout the society, culture, and politics of the United States, and various anti-abortion laws have been enforced in each state since at least 1900. The Republican Party has generally sought to restrict abortion access or criminalize abortion, whereas the Democratic Party has generally defended access to abortion. Now, if you're a thoughtful and caring person, and by all means, if you're a Christian, I think we can all agree that abortion is a terrible thing, a terrible mistake, and a terrible sin, one which very often is sought out and relied upon as a remedy for the consequence of other sins. How could aborting an unborn child possibly please our God in heaven? Why, we may ask, did Jesus, did he never express his outrage at such a practice, which was a reality during his lifetime in the culture? Well, as my son Matthew put it in a recent post on Facebook, Jesus may have remained silent on the subject because abortion was among those practices of Jesus' time, and now, of course, our time, that are so egregious that everyone knows how God must detest it. And what is obvious to everyone need not necessarily be said to anyone. But not only is abortion one of the greatest sins of our time, it's also a reality in our time. And as history has shown, will, like all sin, continue to some extent to be a reality in this dark world that we live in until Jesus returns to us. History has often shown the futility of attempting to legislate morality, whether it's intended to ban alcohol or narcotics or prostitution, homosexuality or lesbianism, domestic abuse, child abuse, slavery, genocide, or any other sin that comes to mind, including the terrible sin of abortion that we've been talking about this day. Humanity, it seems, was never able to obey one law, much less 10. Were God's instructions to abstain from eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or God's giving of the 10 commandments, or the avalanche of laws and regulations that followed through Moses, were those God's own failed attempts to legislate morality, since man has broken all of them? I do not believe that, not for one moment. Rather, I believe that the end has always been in view to our God, to Yahweh, the one and only, the I Am. If I believe in an omniscient God, then I surely must believe that God has always known the end from the beginning. Yahweh has always seen through everything, and he certainly sees through us. And his Son did too, and still does. Can, should, must we as Christians do all that we can do in service to our God to protect the innocent of this world that we've been given charge to protect? The answer we know is yes. In fact, we would all like to see all the evils in the world eradicated. Praise Yahweh for the day on which Jesus will return, and that day is coming. There will be a perfect peace and justice someday. The evils, all the evils of the world will perish, not on our watch, but on His. Some have framed our nation's upcoming presidential election ultimately as a choice between good and evil, or more accurately, the lesser of two evils. And many Christians have put the sin of abortion and the desire and drive to eliminate it at the forefront of all considerations. Others have not. Christians these days find themselves having to make choices that are more and more difficult, since evil manifests itself in many ways and seems present almost everywhere we turn in our world. We'll soon be voting, and some have already voted, in an election to decide who will serve as our president for the next 4 years. And Christians throughout the land aren't all going to vote one way or the other. Each of us should pray, ask Jesus, our Lord and Savior, for His leading in this difficult time. And then listen for His answer. Listen to your heart and to your mind for His response. Yahweh, He already knows the outcome of this election, and Yahweh knows the destiny of this nation that we live in. And He knows the destiny of each of us as well. Finally, friends, remember not to judge each other. For as you judge, you will be judged. Jesus did say that. In the end, Yahweh is our judge and the judge of all humanity. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. I love you, and I hope to see you again next week.